He opened it slow, like he already knew whatever was inside would be worse than whatever he'd imagined. The first page was a still frame from the hallway camera, timestamp 2:14 p.m., Tuesday. Him, his mother, the silver key catching the light between their fingers like a coin-changing hand. "Where did you?" He started. "Keep reading," I said. The second page was the audio transcript. My attorney Renata Chow had it printed clean the way she does everything. No embellishment, just the words as they were spoken, time-stamped down to the second. "Did you find that blank quick claim deed? Printing it tomorrow? We'll slip it in with the tax paperwork." She never reads the fine print. Diane's arms came uncrossed. She didn't move toward the folder. She moved toward the door, and I watched her calculate the distance to her car before she caught herself and stopped. "That's edited," she said. "People edit things." "It's not edited," I said. "It's time-stamped, it's backed up in 3 places. And it's already been reviewed by an attorney who specializes in elder and spousal financial exploitation. Her name is on the folder, page 3. Mark flipped to page 3. Renata's letterhead. Underneath it a paragraph in plain language any judge could read in 10 seconds. "Intent to defraud, forgery of a legal instrument, attempted transfer of real property without the owner's knowledge or consent." "Sarah," his voice cracked on my name like it hadn't in years. "It wasn't. We weren't going to actually." "You printed the forms," I said. "You laid them on the table with the tax documents on top so I wouldn't look too close at the bottom one. You told me it was mostly tax stuff." "That's not a mistake, Mark. That's a script. You rehearsed it." He didn't deny it. That was the part that finally broke something loose in my chest. Not rage, just a clean, cold certainty. The kind you feel when a bone sets back into place. 6 years of "she has a temper, you shouldn't provoke her." And now I finally understood what all that patience had been buying him. Time, room to plan. A wife too busy trying to keep the peace to notice she was being emptied out of her own life, one calm conversation at a time. Diane recovered first. She always did. "This is absurd. I raised that boy in a house with my name on the deed, and no woman is going to stand in my kitchen and tell me what belongs to my family." "It's not your kitchen," I said. "It never was. My grandmother poured the foundation for this house with money she saved cleaning offices for 31 years. She left it to me because she didn't trust anyone else not to lose it. Turns out she was right not to trust you specifically. You ungrateful." "The eviction notice is already filed," I said, cutting her off before the moment of her own anger could carry her into the kind of remark that would make me feel bad for what came next. I didn't want to feel bad, not this time. "You have until the 15th to remove your belongings from the guest room. After that, the sheriff does it for you." For the first time since I'd known her, Diane Vance had nothing to say. I hadn't planned to end the marriage that same week. I want to be honest about that because the version of this story that plays best on camera is the one where the wife discovers the betrayal and burns the whole thing down in one triumphant afternoon. Credits roll and everybody claps. That's not how it happened. What happened is I sat in my car in the parking garage of my office building for 40 minutes after that Sunday. Engine off, hands on the wheel like I was driving somewhere going nowhere, and I let myself grieve the 6 years before I let myself plan the next 6 months. My grandmother used to say that people show you who they are in small moments long before the big ones. I thought about the small moments now. Mark sighing at me instead of asking if I was hurt. Mark taking the key without blinking. Mark laughing at dinner 2 nights before he planned to sign my house out from under me. None of it had been sudden. I had just been the last person willing to read it correctly. Renata Cho had been my grandmother's attorney before she was mine, a small, precise woman with 22 years handling estate and property law in this county, the kind of lawyer who keeps a printed statute in her top drawer instead of looking it up on her phone because she already knows the page number. When I first called her 2 weeks before the Sunday with the folder, I hadn't told her everything. I just asked her hypothetically what would happen to a property held in an irrevocable trust if someone attempted to forge a deed transfer against it. Hypothetically, she'd said that person would be looking at a Class 4 felony forgery charge and possibly conspiracy depending on who else was involved. Then she'd waited a long moment on the phone before she asked gently, "Is this hypothetical, Sarah?" I told her everything. The keys, the bruise I still hadn't shown anyone but my sister, the camera footage. She didn't gasp or tell me how sorry she was, and I loved her a little for that, because sympathy would have made me cry, and I didn't have room for crying yet. She just said, "Send me the footage tonight. Don't confront either of them until the trust is sealed. We do this in order, or we do it wrong." So I did it in order. The escalation had started small the way it always does. It started with Diane letting herself in through the garage code, a code I'd given her once for an emergency 3 years earlier, and never once thinking to ask if she should still have it. I noticed the smell of her perfume in the hallway on days I knew Mark had been alone in the house. I told myself it was nothing. Mark probably let her in to drop off a casserole. She probably just wanted to water the ferns. Then I found the guest room closet rearranged. Grandmother's wedding china moved from the top shelf to a box on the floor. A sticky note in Diane's handwriting that said, "Ask Mark about the china. Mom's set is smaller. Could swap." I told myself it was nothing. Diane liked to organize. She'd always been like that, controlling in a way people mistook for helpfulness. Then came the afternoon. I got home early and found her in my bathroom going through the drawer where I kept the folder with the deed and the trust paperwork my grandmother had given me before she died. Diane, startled when she saw me, laughed too fast, said she was looking for aspirin. I told myself it was nothing. My hands were shaking anyway. That was the first time my body told me the truth before my mind was ready to hear it. The night she hit me with the keys wasn't really the beginning. It was just the first time the pretending stopped working. I called a locksmith the next morning, Ray Delgado, who'd redone the locks on my grandmother's house twice before. Once after a break-in on the block, once just because she liked him and trusted his work. He didn't ask questions when I told him I wanted every lock on the bedroom door changed by noon. The old cores is destroyed, not just rekeyed. Smart, he said, working the drill. Rekeying just means somebody with the old key still gets close. Full replacement, nobody gets close unless you hand it to them. I handed exactly one key to my husband. I watched his mother's face when I did it, and some small, stupid, hopeful part of me thought maybe this will be the line neither of them crosses. Maybe watching me draw a boundary this clearly will be enough. It wasn't. It just told them how much time they had before I noticed the boundary being erased. The cameras went in 3 days after the bruise. I'm not a naturally suspicious person. Ask anyone who knew me before that year, and they'll tell you I was the friend who always assumed the best, who gave people 3, 4, 5 chances before I let myself believe they meant me harm. But my grandmother had also taught me something else, something that mattered more in the end. Trust but verify, and never let anyone convince you that verifying is the same as not trusting. I mounted 2 cameras myself, a Wise on the hallway ceiling angled at the bedroom door, a second Ring doorbell-style unit inside the room facing the closet where the paperwork lived. I told Mark and Diane both out loud, standing in the hallway pointing at the lens like the instructions said. Diane rolled her eyes. Mark said, "Isn't that a little much?" I said the house was too important to leave anything to trust alone anymore, and I watched that land on his face like an accusation because it was one. For 2 weeks, nothing happened. I started to think maybe the cameras alone had done the job. That visibility was its own kind of lock. Then came the Tuesday text, motion detected, second floor hallway. And the video that split my life cleanly into before and after. I didn't confront them that day. I want people to understand how hard that was, because everything in me wanted to drive home and scream until the walls shook. Instead, I sat at my desk, closed the laptop, and called Renata. "Don't react yet," she told me. "Reacting tips them off. Documenting protects you. You have one chance to do this in a way that actually holds up. Emotionally satisfying isn't the same as legally sound, and you need both." So for 2 weeks, I performed a marriage. I cooked the pot roast Diane liked. I let her tell me my seasoning was heavy-handed again, the way she always did, and I said thank you for the feedback. Instead of the thing I actually wanted to say, I let Mark believe the woman he'd married was still exactly as easy to manage as she'd been the week before. Every night after he fell asleep, I sat in the downstairs office with the door locked, working through documents with Renata over encrypted email, moving accounts, reviewing the trust language line by line. The hardest part wasn't the deception. It was the loneliness of it, carrying a truth that heavy through a house full of people who thought they knew me, and not being able to say a word to either of them. The trust took 9 days to seal, start to finish, which Renata told me was fast for how thorough she made it. My grandma house, 5 bedrooms, a wraparound porch she'd added herself the summer I turned 12, a magnolia tree she'd planted the year my mother was born, went into an irrevocable trust, naming me as sole trustee and sole beneficiary. Not Mark, not Diane, not even a contingency clause that named either of them under any circumstance. Renata built it, in her words, forgery-proof and divorce-proof, because from what you've described, you're going to need both. She was right about the second part before I even said it out loud. The forensic side came next because Renata wanted more than the hallway footage. She wanted a paper trail that would survive a courtroom, not just a group chat. She brought in a forensic accountant, a sharp, unhurried man named Marcus Webb, who'd spent 11 years untangling exactly this kind of quiet, slow-motion theft for the county's elder and dependent adult fraud unit before going independent. Marcus pulled bank records for the joint account Mark and I shared and found 4 transfers over the previous 8 months. $300 here, $500 there, once a full one, $200, moved into an account under Diane's name, and labeled in the memo line, house fund. "There's no house fund," I told him when he laid the printouts across Renata's conference table. "I know," Marcus said, "that's the point. When you draft a quick claim like the one your husband had prepared, you sometimes need to show a paper trail suggesting a financial contribution to the property. Makes the transfer look less like a gift and more. When you draft a quick claim like the one your husband had prepared, you sometimes need to show a paper trail suggesting a financial contribution to the property. Makes the transfer look less like a gift and more like an equity claim if anyone ever questions it later. It's not a lot of money individually, but it's evidence of premeditation. It tells a judge this wasn't one bad Sunday. This was a plan they'd been building for the better part of a year." I remember sitting very still when he said that. A year. Longer than the bruise, longer than the cameras. My marriage had been ending in slow motion since long before before I noticed the pace. Renata filed the eviction notice for Diane the same week. She'd never held any legal interest in the property, so removing her from the premises was simpler than people assume. Just formal notice and a 15-day window under state law. The forgery complaint took longer to prepare because Renata wanted it airtight before we ever handed it to law enforcement. "One shot," she said. "We don't get to file this twice." Before any of it reached a detective's desk, there was a night I haven't told anyone about, not even my sister. It was the Wednesday between the folder and the filing, 3 days after I'd laid out the evidence on the coffee table and watched Mark's hand shake against the cover. He hadn't moved out yet. Renata had advised against forcing that too fast, said abrupt moves sometimes spooked people into destroying evidence before we'd finished cataloging it. So we were still living under the same roof, two strangers passing in a hallway that used to feel like ours. I woke at 2:47 a.m. to the sound of the office door easing shut. Not slammed, careful. The kind of quiet that only comes from someone who doesn't want to be heard. I lay still in the dark for a full minute. Heart going so hard, I could feel it in my teeth before I got up and looked. Mark was at the desk in his boxers and an undershirt. The desk lamp turned low, feeding papers into the shredder one at a time. Bank statements. I recognized the credit union's logo even upside down and backlit by the lamp. I didn't say a word. I backed into the hallway, picked up my phone, and texted Renata at 3:00 in the morning because she told me once flatly that I should never sit on something like this until business hours. "He's shredding documents right now," I typed. "What do I do?" Her reply came back in 4 minutes, which told me she'd been sleeping with the phone on her nightstand for exactly this kind of call. "Do not confront him. Do not stop him. Photograph what you can from a distance without entering the room. We already have certified copies of everything relevant from the bank. Mark has pulled those 2 weeks ago. Whatever he's destroying tonight, we already have it. Let him feel like he's covering his tracks. It'll matter later that he tried." She was right. It mattered enormously later. Detective Anand would eventually list destruction of financial records during active investigation window as an aggravating factor in the report. One more brick in a wall the DA's office built without needing my help to build it. But standing in that hallway at 3:00 in the morning, watching my husband's silhouette hunch over a shredder like a man trying to erase a year of his own choices one page at a time, I didn't feel vindicated. I felt something colder, the last flicker of hope that maybe somehow this had all been a misunderstanding going out like a pilot light in a draft. He wasn't confused. He wasn't caught in something his mother had dragged him into against his will. He was awake at 3:00 in the morning, covering for himself alone with no one standing over his shoulder forcing his hand. I went back to bed and didn't sleep. In the morning I made a coffee and said good morning like nothing had happened, and he said it back the same way. And I understood then that we were both very good at this, at performing a marriage neither of us believed in anymore, for reasons that had stopped having anything to do with love. Detective Priya Anand caught the case when Renata finally brought it to the district attorney's fraud division. 17 years with the department, the last 9 in financial crimes, and she had the particular calm of someone who had seen every version of this story so many times that nothing about mine surprised her. Not the keys, not the quick claim, not the year-long paper trail of small transfers dressed up as a house fund. "I want to be straight with you," she told me in an interview room that smelled like burnt coffee and printer toner. "These cases are hard to prosecute when nothing's been signed yet. Attempted forgery, conspiracy to commit forgery, we can charge it, but the DA is going to want to know we're not going to lose in front of a jury who thinks this is just a mother-in-law being pushy." "I have the video," I said. "I have the transcript. I have the transfers. I've seen the file," Detective Anand said. "It's better than most I get, but I want you to understand something before we move forward. Because once we do, there's no version of this where it stays quiet. Your husband's name goes in a report. It's discoverable in your divorce. If his employer runs a background check in the next 5 years, depending on the outcome, it may show up. I need to know you're ready for that because some people aren't, and I'd rather find out now than after we filed." I thought about Mark's face when he opened the folder, the way he hadn't denied it, the way his first instinct had been damage control instead of an apology. "I'm ready," I said. "Good," she said. "Then let's build something that holds." It didn't hold without a fight. Nothing worth having ever does. My grandmother used to say that too, usually right before she rolled up her sleeves for something. Mark hired his own attorney within a week, a sharp-suited man named Colton Reyes, who specialized, according to his website, in high-conflict domestic litigation, which I came to understand was a polite way of saying he made things as expensive and exhausting as possible for whoever was on the other side. He filed a motion arguing that camera footage had been obtained in violation of Mark's expectation of privacy in his own bedroom. Renata batted it down in 4 sentences. The cameras were disclosed in writing, pointed out in person, and the recordings captured conduct in a shared hallway, not anything intimate. The judge agreed without much deliberation. Then Diane tried something worse. 2 days before the eviction deadline, she called me, not Mark, me directly, a number I hadn't given her, which meant she'd pulled it off his phone and left a voicemail I still have saved. Her voice was soft in a way I'd never once heard it in 6 years, syrupy with an apology that didn't fit her mouth. She said she'd been under a lot of stress. She said Mark had pressured her more than people realized. She said if I dropped the complaint, she'd sign anything I wanted, disappear from our lives entirely. No more visits, no more keys, nothing. I almost believed her for about 4 seconds. Then I remembered Marcus Webb's printouts, the transfers stretching back a full year before any of this became visible to me, and I understood the voicemail wasn't an apology. It was a counter-move. She wasn't sorry. She was cornered, and cornered people say whatever gets them out of the corner fastest. There was a moment listening to that voicemail on repeat in my car outside the office when I almost called a reporter instead of the detective. A friend from college worked the local news desk. A woman named Renata, no relation to my attorney. Just a coincidence of names that made me laugh out loud alone in the driver's seat. The first real laugh I'd had in weeks, and part of me wanted the whole thing splashed across a Tuesday night broadcast. Wanted Diane's face on a screen where the whole neighborhood could see exactly who she was. I even opened the contact. I stared at it for a long moment, then I closed it because Renata Cho. My Renata had told me something in our very first meeting that I kept coming back to whenever the anger got loud enough to drown out sense. Public exposure feels like justice, but it moves at the speed of a news cycle, and prosecutors move at the speed of evidence. Burn her in the press before the case is filed, and you hand her lawyer an argument about tainted jury pools and public prejudice that can slow everything down for months. Let the system do it properly and it sticks. Do it your way, and it might not survive the appeal. I sent the recording to Detective Anand within the hour. "That's good," she told me. "That's her on record acknowledging awareness of the scheme in exchange for you dropping charges. That's not remorse. That's attempted witness tampering, technically, depending how a prosecutor wants to frame it. Don't respond to her again. Let us handle it from here." The near miss came 4 days later, the night before the eviction deadline. I got a call at 11:40 p.m. from the security company monitoring my cameras. Motion at the house after hours, no one scheduled to be there. I drove over with my hands locked so tight on the wheel my knuckles ached. Half panicked I'd find the place stripped of everything my grandmother had ever owned, half terrified of what I'd find if Diane was still inside when I arrived. What I found was Diane in the driveway, loading the last of her boxes into her car under the porch light, moving fast, glancing at the street like she expected headlights any second. Beside her feet sat a cardboard box I recognized instantly. My grandmother's china wrapped in the same dish towels Diane had used to rearrange the closet months earlier. The ones with the sticky note that said "Mom's set is smaller, could swap." I didn't scream. I didn't run at her. I called Detective Anand's direct line, the one she'd given me for exactly this kind of moment, and I stood at the end of the driveway with my phone in my hand, recording while Diane realized what the headlights pulling up behind me actually meant. That china belongs to the estate, I told the responding officer, my voice steadier than I expected it to be. It's named specifically in my grandmother's will. It was never a gift to anyone in this family. Diane didn't sign it. She just stood there in the porch light with a dish towel still in her hands, and for the first time since I'd known her, she looked old, not fierce, not commanding, just old, and caught and out of moves. The charges were filed the following week. Attempted forgery of a real property instrument against Diane, conspiracy to commit forgery against both Diane and Mark, and a separate financial exploitation charge against Diane tied to the year of transfers Marcus Webb had traced. Renata warned me it could take months to resolve, and it did. 5 months of continuances of Colton Reyes filing motions designed to wear me down. More than win anything of sitting in hallways outside courtrooms, drinking bad coffee out of paper cups, while lawyers argued about discovery timelines. Mark's plea came first. Facing a conspiracy charge with Marcus's paper trail sitting in evidence, Colton negotiated it down to a lesser charge, attempted forgery, no jail time, 18 months probation, mandatory restitution for the 4 house fund transfers, and a permanent mark on his record that would follow him through every background check for the rest of his professional life. He'd worked in commercial lending for 9 years. The bank let him go 2 weeks. The bank let him go 2 weeks after the plea was entered quietly. No press release, just a severance package and a locked-out badge. I didn't feel triumphant when I heard. I felt something closer to exhaustion. The way you feel after finally setting down something heavy. You'd carried so long you'd forgotten your own arms could ache without it. Diane fought longer because Diane always fought longer. But the china in the driveway had done more damage to her case than she understood in the moment. It corroborated the transfers, the transcript, the whole slow architecture of a year spent moving pieces into place. She took a plea 11 days before trial, forgery in the 4th-degree financial exploitation of a family member, 2 years probation, a restitution order, covering both the transfers and the cost of the forensic accounting Marcus had performed. The judge, reading the sentence aloud, paused on one line long enough that I noticed it. The court finds the defendant's conduct particularly troubling, given the deliberate, sustained nature of the deception, conducted under the guise of family trust. I filed for divorce the same month the charges were filed. Renata handled that too, though she brought in a colleague who specialized in the family side of things, a calm, unshakable woman named Jocelyn Marsh, who'd built her whole practice around exactly the kind of asset protection questions I needed answered fast. Because the house sat inside an irrevocable trust that predated the marriage's collapse and that named me as sole beneficiary. It was never on the table in the divorce proceedings. Mark didn't even try to argue for it. I think by then he understood there was nothing left to argue. I moved back into the house alone 8 weeks after the driveway. I want to say it felt like victory, and some days it did. Standing in the kitchen my grandmother had stood in, running my hand along the counter she'd picked out from a showroom in 1987 because she liked the way the light hit it in the afternoon. But mostly in those first weeks it felt quiet in a way I wasn't used to. A house built for a family holding only me. The ceiling fan ticking overhead the only sound for hours at a time. My sister moved in with me for a month. At first just to help me pack Mark's things into boxes for the storage unit Colton Ray's office arranged pickup for, and then because neither of us wanted to say out loud that I needed the company more than I needed the help. We repainted the guest room, the one Diane had rearranged, the one where I'd found the sticky note about the china, a soft sage green my grandmother would have hated, and I loved precisely because it was mine, a choice made with no one else's opinion attached to it. I still have the folder, not the original. Renata's office kept that sealed as part of the case file available if anyone ever needed it again. I made my own copy though, and it sits in the same drawer where the trust paperwork used to hide. Not because I need the evidence anymore, but because some part of me wanted to remember exactly what it looked like. The moment someone finally believed me instead of asking what I'd done to provoke it. A year out, almost to the week, I sat on the porch my grandmother built with her own hands in the summer I turned 12, watching the magnolia tree finally bloom the way it did every June, white and heavy and a little too fast. Like it knew it only had a few weeks to show off before the petals gave out. Detective Annan had called that morning, a courtesy I hadn't expected, just to let me know Diane's probation officer had confirmed full compliance, restitution current, no violations, closed file. She told me some cases stay open in her head longer than the paperwork says they should, and mine was one she was glad to finally close clean. I thought about telling her thank you for something bigger than the case for the moment in that first interview room, when she hadn't flinched at my footage, hadn't asked what I'd done to provoke a woman twice my age into hitting me with the set of keys, had just looked at the file and said, "Let's build something that holds." But I just said thank you and meant it and let her go. Mark texted once a few months after the plea, a message I read twice and never answered. He said he was sorry. He said he hoped I was doing okay. He didn't say he was sorry for the deed or the transfers or the year of small patient theft that had preceded all of it. Just sorry generally, the way people are sorry when they finally run out of other things to be. I never showed him this house again. He never asked to see it. What I remember most sitting on that porch a year later isn't the courtroom or the driveway or even the folder landing on the coffee table with a sound that stopped every word in the room. It's the locksmith Ray Delgado kneeling by the bedroom door that first afternoon, drilling out the old cores while I stood in the hallway holding a bag of ice against my cheek, and the thing he said without looking up, half to himself, half to me, full replacement. Nobody gets close unless you hand it to them. I think about that a lot now, not just about locks, about everything I let close to me for 6 years, because it was easier than asking whether it had earned the right to be there. My grandmother built this house so no one could ever take it from the people she loved. She never told me I'd have to fight for that promise myself, but I think if she'd known, she would have said the same thing she said about everything else worth keeping, that you don't inherit safety. You build it brick by brick, lock by lock, one boundary at a time, until the only key that matters is the one you never have to hand to anyone twice. The magnolia dropped its first petals onto the porch steps that evening, the way it always does in June. I let them stay there a while before I swept them up.